Dr. Naomi Carter sat in her parked car for a moment, keys resting in her palm. New house. New chapter. She took a breath, stepped out, and walked toward the front gate with calm, measured confidence. She didn't make it 5 steps. "Ma'am. Stop right there." The voice came sharp, practiced. A uniformed HOA security guard blocked the path, hand raised like she'd crossed an invisible line. "I live here," Naomi said evenly. The guard glanced at a clipboard, then at her again. His eyes lingered a second too long. "I don't see your name on the approved resident list." Before Naomi could respond, a white SUV pulled up hard beside the curb. The door swung open. The HOA president stepped out. Mid-50s. Perfect hair. Tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked Naomi up and down, then turned to the guard as if Naomi wasn't standing there. "She's not on our records," the president said loudly. "We've had issues with people sneaking in lately." Naomi felt the first eyes on her. Curtains shifting. Porch doors cracking open. "I'm the homeowner," Naomi said, her voice calm, controlled. "The deed was filed this morning." The HOA president laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "That's not how it works," she replied. "Until we verify ownership, you don't belong here." She turned, projecting her voice so the neighbors could hear. "She's an illegal occupant." The word landed heavy. Illegal. A neighbor across the street froze mid-step. Another raised a phone. Naomi stood still. No shouting. No explanation. Just silence. "Call the police," the HOA president said. "We're not taking chances." The guard hesitated, just a second, then stepped aside and spoke into his radio. Within minutes, a patrol car rolled in, lights flashing softly in the bright afternoon sun. The officer approached, neutral expression, hand resting near his belt. "What's going on?" The HOA president didn't miss a beat. "This woman is trespassing. She claims she owns the property, but she can't prove it. We believe she's occupying the home illegally." The officer turned to Naomi. "Ma'am?" Naomi met his eyes. Calm. Steady. "I purchased the home legally," she said. "All documentation is filed. I'm not trespassing." The HOA president scoffed. "That proves nothing." The officer looked between them. The crowd had grown now. Whispers carried through the air. Naomi felt it, the familiar weight. The moment where truth didn't matter as much as perception. She said nothing more. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply stood there, silent, as the word illegal hung over her like a verdict already decided. And somewhere behind the HOA president's confident smile, a mistake was being made, one that would soon follow them all the way into a courtroom they were not prepared to stand in. Can you believe this HOA tried to kick her out of her own home? Drop your city or state in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more justice served. The front door of Dr. Naomi Carter's new home opened with a soft creak, welcoming her into the space she had dreamed about for months. Sunlight streamed through the windows, falling on empty hardwood floors that smelled faintly of fresh paint and promise. Each room was pristine, ready for life to begin. She ran her hand along the countertop, imagining dinner parties, late-night conversations, laughter echoing through the halls. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a sanctuary after years of fighting battles for others. But the moment didn't last. A knock echoed at the door. Naomi opened it to find an envelope taped to the frame. HOA. The crisp white paper felt like a slap. Pending verification of ownership, it read. No explanation. No apology. Just words that hinted the battle had already begun. She checked her email. Nothing. No welcome packet. No acknowledgement. Just silence. By mid-morning, another email arrived, terse and formal. Your ownership claim is under review. Until verified, you may not occupy the property. Naomi's fingers tightened around her phone. She had done everything right, signed the deed, filed the paperwork, paid in full. And yet, the HOA treated her as an intruder. It wasn't just bureaucracy. It was a pattern she had seen before. Subtle comments from neighbors. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. A casual glance at her dark skin in the perfect, bright neighborhood. It was quiet, but heavy, the kind of hostility that didn't need to be shouted to hurt. She didn't react publicly. Not yet. Naomi knew the stakes. She let the messages pile up, filing screenshots and keeping track of every phone call. By the time the HOA president made another public statement in the neighborhood newsletter, Naomi was ready, but not to fight. Not yet. She simply observed, collected evidence, and waited. And that was when the first whispers began. From neighbors. From delivery people. From the occasional curious passerby. Questions about her presence. Questions about ownership. A subtle shift in the air, as if her very existence in that home was up for debate. Naomi walked through her home that evening, sunlight now replaced by the soft, golden hue of late afternoon. She stopped in the living room, looking around. This was supposed to be safe, supposed to be hers. But safety didn't arrive just because you purchased it. It had to be claimed. And claiming it would mean standing firm while the world tried to tell her she didn't belong. Somewhere beyond the tall, manicured hedges, the HOA was plotting its next move. Naomi knew it. And she was ready. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because Dr. Naomi Carter wasn't just a homeowner. She was a civil rights attorney. And her quiet patience wasn't weakness, it was preparation. The war had begun. The next morning, the notice appeared on her front door. Bright paper. Bold letters. Impossible to miss. Notice of violation, unauthorized occupancy. Dr. Naomi Carter stood still, reading it twice. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she recognized it. This wasn't confusion. It was pressure. The kind designed to make people panic, to make them leave quietly. She peeled the notice off, folded it once, and placed it carefully on the kitchen counter. By noon, the email started again. Failure to vacate may result in fines. Utilities may be restricted pending verification. Law enforcement will be notified. Each message was colder than the last. No signature. No name. Just authority without accountability. Naomi responded once. Attached, a copy of the recorded deed. Subject line, ownership confirmed. The reply came 15 minutes later. That document is under review. Under review. Again. By afternoon, a second patrol car rolled slowly past her house. Then another. Neighbors began to notice. Conversation stopped when she stepped outside. A man watering his lawn pretended not to see her. A woman across the street closed her garage door halfway through pulling in. That evening, as Naomi unloaded a small box from her car, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Ma'am, you need to stop." The same HOA guard. This time, he wasn't alone. The HOA president stood beside him, arms crossed, confident. Behind them, a police officer waited, already tired. "We've asked you repeatedly to provide proof of ownership," the president said loudly. "You failed to comply." Naomi handed the officer her ID and the deed. Calm. Steady. The officer skimmed the document, frowning slightly. "This looks legitimate," he said. The HOA president snapped back instantly. "That's not your call. The HOA hasn't approved her residency." The officer paused. He looked at Naomi. Then at the president. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this is a civil matter. If there's a dispute, it needs to be resolved in court." The president's smile tightened. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." That night, another notice was slid under Naomi's door. This one thicker. Official. Notice of intent to remove occupant. The language was aggressive. Final. Designed to scare. Naomi sat at her dining table, spreading the documents out in neat rows. Emails. Notices. Screenshots. Names. Dates. Times. She didn't call a lawyer. She didn't post online. She didn't warn them. Instead, she opened a fresh folder and labeled it simply Evidence. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Manicured lawns. Decorative lights. The illusion of peace. Inside, Dr. Naomi Carter was calm in a way that came from experience. She had seen this tactic before, the slow tightening, the manufactured doubt, the way authority was used to erase people without ever raising a voice. They thought she would break. They thought she would leave. What they didn't understand was this. Every email they sent, every notice they posted, every time they called the police without cause, they weren't pushing her out. They were building her case. And tomorrow, the HOA would make its biggest mistake yet. The sun had nearly set, but the day's light still filled the living room, bouncing off the polished floors. Dr. Naomi Carter sat at the edge of her sofa, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the neatly stacked folder of evidence on the coffee table. Each document, each email, each notice from the HOA was a thread in a tapestry she had been quietly weaving. She sipped her tea, unhurried. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with the illusion of calm. Lawns were being mowed, children played under the fading golden sky, and yet the weight of the HOA's hostility lingered like a shadow over her home. She could feel it pressing at the edges of every perfectly kept garden, every clean white fence. Naomi allowed herself a moment to reflect. She had fought battles like this before, not against HOA boards, but against corporations, city officials, and even government agencies that thought rules were optional when convenient. She remembered cases where ordinary people had been crushed by authority. And in every single one, those who were calm, prepared, and strategic were the ones who emerged unbroken. She looked at her hands. Strong, steady, hands that had drafted legal motions, negotiated settlements, and argued in courtrooms where silence could intimidate more than shouting ever could. She knew instinctively that the HOA's aggression was nothing more than noise. They were loud, chaotic, desperate to assert control. But their confidence was fragile. Her phone buzzed. Another message from the HOA president, demanding immediate compliance. She read it, nodded once, and placed the phone face down. She would not reply. Not yet. Every word she had, every document, every record of harassment and intimidation would be presented on her terms. Naomi closed her eyes briefly and pictured the courtroom. Not the intimidation or the angry glares, but the facts, the documents, the undeniable truth. She knew the moment when the clerk would call her name, when the judge would see her credentials, and when the silence would fall over the room like a heavy curtain. That moment would be quiet, controlled, the kind that shatters arrogance and exposes lies. And so she waited. Not passively, but intentionally. Every second the HOA thought they were gaining control, she was gaining clarity. Every violation they sent, every threat they made, became a piece of the case that would ultimately undo them. Naomi's calm was not weakness. It was preparation. Her patience was her power. She had learned long ago that people who shout first often lose first. And the HOA was about to learn that lesson, in the courtroom, in front of everyone who had watched them humiliate her. Because Dr. Naomi Carter didn't just own this house on paper. She owned the truth. And the truth was about to arrive. The morning of the court hearing arrived crisp and bright, sunlight spilling into the city's historic courthouse. Dr. Naomi Carter parked her car, stepped out, and adjusted her blazer. Every step toward the entrance was measured, calm, purposeful, the very opposite of the chaos she had endured at the HOA. Inside, the hallways buzzed with ordinary cases, traffic disputes, small claims, procedural hearings. No one could have guessed that a battle over a single home would expose corruption, arrogance, and prejudice so blatant that it would silence an entire room. She walked to the courtroom, the folder of evidence tucked neatly under her arm. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor, a rhythmic reminder that she was the only one in control here. The HOA lawyer was already present, smug, overconfident, and radiating the false assurance of someone convinced that intimidation and bluster could win a case. The courtroom was packed with curious neighbors, a few media personnel, and the police officer who had appeared at her home days earlier. They all watched the exchange with varying degrees of disbelief. The judge entered, late, rubbing his temples, scanning through paperwork. From the bench, he looked every bit the bored arbiter of routine, a man who had seen thousands of cases pass through his hands and had grown immune to drama. He glanced at the HOA lawyer and offered a polite nod. "Counselors, call your cases," he said in a neutral tone. The HOA lawyer stood immediately. "Your Honor, we present a case of unauthorized occupancy. The plaintiff, claiming to own the property, is in violation of community guidelines." His words flowed with practiced confidence. The arrogance in his voice was palpable, designed to make the plaintiff appear small, insignificant, like she was trying to bend the rules for her benefit. Naomi remained seated, calm, her eyes scanning the room. She did not respond. She did not frown. She did not allow the tension in the air to touch her. Every detail of her folder, the emails, notices, recorded interactions, and legal documents, was ready. Every argument they could present had already been anticipated and countered on paper. The clerk shuffled papers and then, almost casually, began to call the names for the day's cases. Naomi's heart did not race. Her breathing remained steady. The courtroom was unaware that the moment of reckoning was approaching. The HOA lawyer continued, unaware that he was stepping into a storm carefully prepared over weeks of patience and strategy. His voice rose slightly as he continued detailing the supposed violations, confident that the judge would see the matter as routine. Naomi adjusted her folder, straightened her posture, and waited. The camera of a neighbor, hidden in the back row, quietly recorded every word. This was no ordinary dispute anymore, it was about to become a public unraveling. And then, as the clerk reached the heart of the docket, the name that would change everything was about to be called. The moment that would freeze the courtroom, silence arrogance, and force every eye to witness truth in action, was closer than anyone could imagine. The courtroom fell silent as the clerk cleared his throat and shuffled the papers in front of him. Names were being called for the day's routine docket, minor disputes, procedural matters, and, seemingly, one trivial HOA case. Then he said it. "Dr. Naomi Carter, plaintiff." The words floated across the room, simple, formal, and yet heavier than any gavel strike. The judge froze mid-sentence. Pen paused. Glasses tilted down to the tip of his nose. A brief, sharp intake of breath escaped him. He leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing, as recognition slowly dawned. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Neighbors stiffened. Reporters adjusted their cameras. Even the police officer in the back row leaned forward. Is that Dr. Carter?" the judge murmured under his breath, almost to himself. The HOA lawyer's confident expression faltered. A bead of sweat traced his temple. He straightened, cleared his throat, tried to regain composure, but the courtroom had shifted. The arrogance that had filled the room moments ago was now replaced by tension, unease, a quiet realization that they were in the presence of someone whose reputation carried weight far beyond the local HOA. Dr. Naomi Carter rose slowly, her movements precise, calm. Not a single gesture betrayed emotion. Her eyes scanned the room briefly, landing on the HOA president, who stiffened under her gaze. The smug smile that had dominated the past week wavered, faltered, and finally disappeared. The judge, still standing, adjusted his robe. His voice, low and controlled, cut through the silence. "Counsel, proceed, carefully." A murmur ran through the room. Cameras clicked. Neighbors whispered. The HOA president's jaw tightened. This was no longer a simple eviction dispute. Naomi returned to her seat, calmly opening her folder. She placed the evidence in front of her with deliberate care, each document a silent statement. Every notice, every email, every threat had been documented. The power in the room had shifted. Silence wasn't just absence of sound, it was presence of truth. The HOA lawyer cleared his throat, but the words faltered in his mouth. He had begun the day full of confidence, ready to assert authority, only to realize that his arrogance had led him straight into a courtroom prepared for exposure. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled, studying Naomi for the first time. The entire courtroom waited, tense, electrified, as the quiet calm of a woman who had been underestimated began to reshape the narrative entirely. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the notices. Not the fines. Not the petty power of an HOA. Truth had arrived. And everyone in the room, for the first time, knew exactly whose presence commanded it. The courtroom air felt heavier now, thick with tension. Every eye was on Dr. Naomi Carter, yet she remained perfectly composed, opening her folder with deliberate precision. Each sheet of paper, every email, every notice, every recorded call, was stacked neatly, evidence that told a story far bigger than a simple HOA dispute. The HOA lawyer, once brimming with confidence, shuffled nervously, glancing at the judge, then at Naomi, then at the folder now lying open before him. He could feel the momentum slipping, but he had no idea how fast it would crumble. Naomi stood, calm but commanding. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady, "this is not just a matter of occupancy. This is a deliberate pattern of harassment, intimidation, and racial discrimination." She handed over the first document, HOA emails instructing staff to ignore her proof of ownership. The judge glanced at them, his brow furrowing. The language was casual, almost invisible to an untrained eye, but the intent was unmistakable. Next, she presented the violation notices. Bold letters threatening fines and utility restrictions for a homeowner who had legally purchased the property. One after another, Naomi laid them down, each one reinforcing the narrative. The HOA had acted in bad faith from the start. "Your Honor," she continued, "these are not isolated incidents. Over the past 3 weeks, I have received at least 7 notices, each contradicting the last. Every time I presented proof of ownership, it was dismissed or ignored. This is a systemic attempt to intimidate me into vacating my home unlawfully." The judge leaned forward, scanning the pages. This is extensive." Naomi didn't pause. She pulled out screenshots of emails sent to neighbors, boasting about enforcing rules selectively, targeting her, a black woman, in a predominantly white community. The judge's eyes widened slightly as the pattern became unmistakable. Even the HOA president, sitting stiffly at the council table, could no longer hide the panic. Her smug confidence had evaporated, replaced with a growing awareness she had miscalculated. Every document Naomi presented was a mirror reflecting their arrogance, their discrimination, their illegal overreach. The courtroom remained silent, except for Naomi's calm, steady voice and the soft shuffle of papers. She paused for effect, letting each point sink in, each injustice register in the minds of the judge, the attendees, and the HOA. Finally, she placed the last piece of evidence on the bench, a fully executed property deed, filed correctly, showing her rightful ownership from the moment of purchase. The judge held it, eyes scanning carefully. He set it down and looked up. "This is not just a mistake," he said, voice measured but firm. "This is intentional. The HOA has knowingly harassed a lawful homeowner, attempting to weaponize bureaucracy to remove her. They underestimated her. They underestimated the truth." The room collectively exhaled, a release that carried the weight of the revelation. The HOA lawyer slumped slightly in his chair. The president sat rigid, pale, silently realizing their fate was no longer in their hands. Dr. Naomi Carter remained seated, calm, collected. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to argue. The documents, the facts, the truth itself had spoken, and they had spoken loudly enough to silence every false claim, every arrogant assumption, every act of intimidation. In that courtroom, it was no longer about the HOA. It was about accountability. Justice had found its stage, and Dr. Naomi Carter had ensured everyone in that room would witness it. The courtroom remained silent for a moment longer, letting the weight of the truth settle over everyone present. Then the judge cleared his throat and spoke, measured and firm. The actions of the HOA board in this matter were deliberate, unlawful, and discriminatory. Fines are imposed. The HOA president and board members are hereby held accountable. Furthermore, this case will be referred to the Department of Justice for review of systemic violations. The HOA president's shoulders slumped. The lawyer shifted uneasily in his seat. Neighbors exchanged glances, whispers carrying disbelief through the room. Outside, reporters hurried to capture statements. Cameras focused on Dr. Naomi Carter, who exited the courtroom with calm dignity. Every step she took radiated quiet authority. The media asked questions, but she spoke only once. This is not about revenge. It's about accountability. No one is above the law. Within the community, the HOA board was dissolved. New leadership was appointed under strict oversight. Notices of apology were sent to neighbors who had been misled. Every violation, every intimidation tactic was formally addressed. For Naomi, the victory was clear but measured. Justice had been served, consequences enforced, and the community reminded, no matter how powerful, abuse of authority cannot stand when faced with truth. She returned to her home, unlocked the door, and finally stepped inside, fully at peace.